And there's the important bit and the bit where I press the button and the bit probably where my Wi-Fi just decides it's not going to play ball with us tonight for this program. If it doesn't, I'm talking to myself. Welcome to Shelf Analysis. Welcome to episode 35 of Shelf Analysis. I know, since March, since we started all of this. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on the program where the sun has just come out outside on the houses immediately opposite where I am, and that's why there's a shiny thing going on all over my shoulder here in the spare bedroom tonight. Thanks a million for joining us. I will tell you who our guest is coming up in a few minutes as well. There's a few bits and pieces I want to let you know about just before that, though, as well. There will be a shelf analysis next week and the one the week after. And then for the month of August, the program is off primarily because I'm off, because I'm offline and I say on holidays. I'm not exactly leaving the country, but I will definitely not be here and not be doing social stuff for the month of August or even online, which is the thing I do every year, which is quite nice. But there will be shelf analysis again coming in September because people are already booked for those programs. Couple of things before I get any further. I am going to show you some of the posts that arrived in this week. Before I do that, I need to probably explain away something. I didn't get an enormous amount of reading done this week. Got a little bit done because it's been a busy week. It wasn't necessarily to do with work. It wasn't necessarily to do with all the other bits and pieces that normally keep me occupied. It was to do with these. It's the only picture you're ever going to get here. I'm not making a big deal out of this, but there are now dogs in the house, and there are now 2 of them, and they arrived this week. And as a result of which, it's been dogs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, pretty much. And there's a lot of walking involved, and I'm absolutely knackered. Thank you for asking. But there they are. They're the ones that have been occupying me over the course of the last week, and that's why it's possible there's not a huge amount of work has been done anywhere by me over the course of the last 7 days or so. There's the sun out again. Might have to get used to that as the weeks go on. Anyway, a couple of things that are worth headsing up next week, and I want to do this well in advance because you just have to register for it. It's not going to cost you anything. The ticket doesn't cost you anything. Keelan Hughes has been a previous guest here on Shelf Analysis, has talked about The Wild Laughter. It is her brand new book. It is fantastic. There are no physical launches happening, of course, but Kevin Barry is doing an in conversation with her under the banner of the Courage Festival, and that's happening next week. Now, that's next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. So the joy is you can go watch that and then come and watch Shelf Analysis here immediately afterwards. That's next week. Have a look at the Courage website or just stick in Keelan Hughes, Kevin Barry, Wild Laughter, launch, all of that. Have a look at Keelan's social channels and you'll find the details for that. That is happening this night next week, and that will be ahead of next week's shelf analysis here. We've got a couple of other things I want to show you. First of all, let's do this first. Okay. I can't tell you what I'm reading this week. Because we're already reading for the Eason's Autumn list, myself and Sinead, and some of the stuff that we're reading and some of the stuff we're reading slightly further on, we're not allowed to even tell you we have copies of it. I've been given specific briefings saying, don't say you have that or everyone's going to want one. So I can't do the usual thing where I talk about what I've been reading this week. So instead, maybe briefly and very quickly, I'm going to show you some of the posts that arrived in this week and some of the stuff that's definitely going to be getting to the top of the TBR pile. This came in during the week. This is called The Pink Line. It's The World's Queer Frontiers by Mark Geweiser. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It is quite a tome. However, it's a tome about the nature of shifting gender roles and shifting gender frontiers in the 21st century. Seems really well put together. I like the look of that. Also, I did have an earlier proof of this, but it was just a blank green cover. This is Emma Donoghue's new book. It's The Pull of the Stars. The cover immediately makes you go, yep, I'm into that. You know a little bit about it, that it's set in Dublin in 1918 during a pandemic, during the Spanish flu. The book was originally supposed to be coming out in 2021, but it's been moved up because of the topicality of the nature of part of the subject matter of it. Anyway, that's the wonderful Emma Donoghue's new book. Did I show you this already? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. So I stuck it in the pile of this just in case I didn't. If you read Convenience Store Woman, this is Earthlings by Sakaya Murata. And it's not out until October, but if, like me, you read and loved Convenience Store Woman, this is Sakaya Murata's new book, which arrived in this week as well, as did this. This is Jack. This is Marilyn Robinson's last in her Gilead series of books. If you've read any of those, this is a prequel to the previous ones that came in during the week as well. Wait, I'm getting, there's 2 more. This arrived in today, and it's great. If you were one of those people who read the In Her Shoes Facebook page during the campaign to repeal the 8th Amendment, there were a lot of people's personal stories being told on that page. They have been compiled. Some of them have. And this is called In Her Shoes, Women of the Eighth, compiled and put together by Erin Darcy. There's 32 of the stories that originally appeared on that page are going to be in there. And finally, today, I was going to say, because he talked to me about it on this show, he didn't. I've actually done 2 other online interviews involving Kevin Barry, in which he talked to me about them, one of which is coming soon. I'll give you details about that. Kevin Barry's brand new collection of short stories, which is called That Old Country Music. And it's been a few years since Kevin Barry has had a collection of short stories. Is Dark Lies the Island, the last one? Anyway, this is due out. There's a couple of copies of it knocking around, and that's the brand new Kevin Barry. So that's what came in this week, and that's what turned up this week. Before we get to our guest tonight, as usual, I will bring you Karina. Karina is our reading houseplant. Every week, Karina is reading something. Not quite sure what Karina is going to be reading. Let's find out what she is and where she has it. Karina, where are you? There you are, Karina. And I'm really impressed that my wife has managed to make the dogs sit still in the background of the shot. We were asked, could they potentially photobomb a Karina? That's the stillest I've seen them over the course of the last 6 days. Karina, though, is reading Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton, the one that Lin-Manuel Miranda was reading when he brought on holidays when he came up with the idea of the musical. Karina, are you enjoying it? I'm not going to ask you to shake yourself because you're on a very dodgy surface there. You are. Okay, all is good. And the dogs haven't eaten any of you as of yet. That's a yes. Thank you, Karina, for showing us what you are reading this week. Now, our guest on episode 35 of Shelf Analysis, if you have any questions, stuff you want to put to him, please feel free to do so. Drop it in comments below. And obviously, if you're watching this a little bit later on the YouTube channel or you're watching this on RTE Culture, this happened ages ago. This is one of those, the phone lines are already closed sort of things. I'm thrilled to do this primarily because I was thinking about this last week, and actually Karina was reading Lanny last week. And I decided I would punt and send a message to Max Porter on Twitter and ask him if he fancied coming on the program this week, and he was very gracious and was very kind and agreed to do so. So the author of Grief is the Thing with Feathers and Lanny, Max Porter, welcome to Shelf Analysis.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Not at all. Tell me a little bit, first of all, about where you are.
I'm in this little room, which is my office, and it's going to be my son's bedroom, leaving me officeless. But we have not solved this conundrum. I thought I might get myself a shed in the garden, you know, the classic cliche of a man in doing his thing in the shed, but that was going to be too expensive and difficult. So, and then as luck would have it, my son said he didn't want to be down in this slightly cold, depressing room. He wanted to stay in with his brothers. So for the time being, it's still mine. It's my little kingdom. It's about 4 foot, so just about 4 foot by 2 foot, but I love it in here. And the kids are all watching the screen, so we're safe from the noise.
Possibly not safe for my dogs, but that's a completely different matter. Tell me a little bit then about how lockdown has been for you, because we started this series of programs in March when all of this began, and over the course of it, I've gotten different answers from authors, both depending on where we all are in this. And for some people, it's been fantastic. For some people, they found it almost impossible to work. What's the last few months been like for you?
I'm okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhere in the middle of those things. We've been incredibly lucky. We've been healthy, touch wood. You know, the kids are all fine. There haven't been many cases in the part of the world where I live, which is in the southwest in Bath. Three boys under 10. It presents various practical challenges. You know, they're like caged animals. But it's also been incredibly intimate and special in other ways. I do all the cooking. I'm very happy with my cooking. First 2 months I did no work at all, panicked a bit, lay awake at night worrying. And you know, I'm sure you're the same. You worry in every direction at the moment, don't you? And if you kind of start at 6 a.m. worrying about the terrible pain and injustice in this world, then you may as well lie down and give up for the day. And for the first couple of months there was slightly that for me. But then this last month, you know, my littlest went back to school a couple of days a week in a little bubble, and he loves it. And my eldest has started his socially distanced, contactless football training again, so he's in a really good mood.
Yeah,
and we've had a really good couple of work weeks. I've just suddenly, you know, the muse arrived back in this little office, So we're okay. Yeah, we're okay. I've been growing things. I've been growing plants, and I get out for my swim in the river every now and then. And I don't need much. I'm okay. But interestingly, hearing your introduction, you can blame the dogs. I'm not reading at the moment, really.
Well, this is a conversation that I had certainly a while back, because for the first maybe 2 months of this, I was maybe in that position where I couldn't read at all. I was found myself, endlessly scrolling through news and trying to keep in contact with friends, and I found it almost impossible to read. Now it has come back, and it's come back over time. But are you still in that space?
Which should you give up on first, Rick? Friends or news?
Well, to be honest with you, friends don't really get a lot of my time at the best time. Anyway, sorry to those who are watching tonight. No, I pulled back from news for quite a while as well, and I kind of still have. I took all the apps off my phone and only check in a couple of times a day, which I found has given me a little bit more space than I wouldn't normally have had. And of course, getting dogs in the last week, I spent all my time walking out in the real world in the fresh air. It's been very zen. It's been quite nice.
Good. I mean, the evidence is bountiful about the damage of social media, particularly. But I think one has to really train oneself, retrain oneself to remember what isn't. I don't want to patronize, the platforms and say they're not the real world, because of course there's no such thing as the real world. But one needs to be reminded that actually that kind of extremism of opinion, the sort of velocity of it, and the unkindness of it, the fundamental meanness of it, that's not essential. You can just turn that off.
Yeah, and there is a thing where obviously there are joyful things that you find through social media, but I've found certainly over the last month, maybe 2 months, that every time I dive in, it's like,
doesn't it feel, because you're so aware of your body in space and time, and the relationship with other bodies in space and time, yours or the distant or notional or even the statistical, the way we've just reduced other bodies to numbers in this extraordinary way, that when you're on these websites, you actually feel it in the. I think you feel, the pulse rate goes back up. You find that kind of irritability is back on you, almost as if it's in your skin. And I think, well, hang on, I mean, like immediacy of news, great. Like facts, great. Democracy of opinion, great. But me feeling this way, this kind of bubbling confrontational rage, I don't know. And especially not when I've got little people in the house who are coming to me for guidance, not necessarily educational, because I've proven myself fairly hopeless in that regard. But even for the temperature of the domestic scene, like, are we having a happy day or are we raging?
Yeah,
and rage every day.
I think that's one of the reasons that I started this, was because obviously books in a time like this, particularly if people are in that space where they can read. This is it's a wonderful way to not opt out, that's the wrong word, but to find themselves an adjunct space in the world where you can go off and be somewhere else for a while. Before I ask you to show us the books that you've chosen tonight, I know Lanny's been out for a while, but I reread it again this week, just in the run-up to this, because I knew that I was going to be talking to you. And it is still as extraordinary a book as I originally thought it was. It is one of those things that I love, things that are experimental. I love things that challenge me. And certainly when you can do it all within the space of, because it's quite a short book as well. It's only just over 200 pages as well, and it's lyrical.
That's extremely long. I don't know what you're talking about there, I'm afraid. That's my longest book. I'm going to get a lot shorter from now here on in.
Tell me, maybe then, for those people who haven't read Lanny or experienced it yet, just really briefly give us an idea as to what the book is about.
Well, it's become all sorts of things since it was published. It seems to have become a book for people about this time, and about the relationship between human beings and the planet, and growing up or growing old, or living in a village in a time of ecological crisis. But those weren't especially the things that were in my head when I was writing it. To me, it was a book about friendship between a young boy and an old man, and not a pedagogical, not an educational relationship in the conventional sense, a pure platonic friendship, exchange of ideas, and that seemed, in the time when I was first thinking about it, a very unlikely thing, quite a radical proposition in today's social climate. So it's a book about art and eccentricity and the idea of the outsider, both in the communities we live in, but also the idea of otherness as a threat, So yeah, it's on the surface, it's about a little village just outside London, and the friendship between this little, very interesting, eccentric boy and an old man who is an artist.
And at the same time, though, I think you're right in that I think perhaps reading this book maybe 8, 9, 10 months ago, maybe a completely different proposition to people who might come to it now simply because of where we all are and the headspace we're all in at the moment.
Yeah, and that's something we're all working with as readers and writers and anyone kind of involved in what is the art saying about the life, and what is life going to do to the art. I guess the thing that's really struck me is how little. Other writers have said this. I've been interested in hearing writers say this about, and actually artists of all kind, the way that once you finish the work and put it out into the world, it becomes no longer yours. And I think ownership of the work is an interesting thing anyway. I don't really believe in ownership in any conventional sense. And I certainly want to push against it in the kind of capitalist sense. Like, I want to give the work away. I want to, once the rent's paid, I want to share this stuff. I believe in the gift economy, as I'll probably say a few times tonight, talking about books I love. But the idea that once you set the thing free in the world, it starts coming back to you as something almost unrecognizable is a fascinating, thrilling thing. And also the sheer freedom of that. One person's favorite book is another person's absolute nonsense. And I find that extremely inspiring as a person whose job it is to now make stuff. Because you can't please all the people all the time, and nor should you want to. I mean, here we go on social media again, like, consensus is a peculiar thing where art's concerned. So the kind of, I remember my first book, my publisher sent to me, had I not been familiar with The Hammock on Amazon, which is lots of 5-star reviews and lots of 1-star reviews, and and that The Hammock is a desirable thing. And she said to me, you will have to find a thicker skin, because if people hate the book, they're going to find language that is accurate in their hatred of the book, and it will hurt, because it won't necessarily just be about the book. It'll be about you and who you are in the world, and the things you care about and things you believe in. And I remember thinking, I don't want a thick skin. I'm proudly thin-skinned, and my thin-skinnedness is what makes me who I am in the world. But I guess a bit's changed between now and then, and now disagreement about the work, and indeed active dislike of it is fine. It's not why you make it.
I think some of the books that certainly in the book club, amongst the 30-odd thousand people in the book club, that have been those that have been most divisive, have been some of the best books over the last few years. So I think it falls into that, and I think people will take lots of different things from it, which again I enjoy immensely. We are here.
Like publishing, what is publishing wisdom? Do you know what I mean? Like all the most important and interesting books over the history of literature have been the ones that were rejected, or said it could never happen, or have broken the rules. We kid ourselves there are any rules, there isn't any right thing, there isn't any critical consensus. You've got to make the work you've got to make.
Tell me about the things you love, because ostensibly that's why this series exists, which is to bring on authors and give them a small amount of time to not have to talk about their own work, or not have to talk about what it is that they do, but the things that they love themselves instead. It's usually 3 books, 4 books, 5 books. You've got a kind of interesting selection tonight, and then a few adjuncts as well, which I quite like the idea of as well. So maybe if we want to get cracking, what's the first one you've chosen?
Well, I've cheated, right? Firstly, I've done some product placement.
I've seen that. That's impressive.
They're just gently there because I didn't know what to choose. But then what I've done is, on top of the book I've chosen, it's sort of, the book represents other things. So, for example, my first book I want to recommend is Mark O'Connell's book, Notes from an Apocalypse. And to me, this represents several things. It represents the type of person Mark is, the type of writer Mark is, the type of book this is, the importance of reading books like this now. But also, I used to be Mark's editor in my old job. So it also represents to me missing my job. So it represents like Rebecca Solnit and Sarah Moss and Ellie Catton and Patrick DeWitt and Ben Marcus and all these lovely people I used to work with who I no longer do. But if I had to choose one, so I chose Mark. And we're talking about love. I love Mark, and you've had him on, right?
Yeah, he's been previously on the show talking about that. And again, To Be a Machine for me is one of my favorite nonfiction books the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah, I think he's exceptional.
To me, what Mark represents, and I know he's on holiday, so I hope he's not going to watch this. Mark represents something that we are. Well, it's very hard to come by now, and it's frighteningly scarce, I think, in the sort of fabric of our society, which is a genuinely good man with a razor sharp intellect who isn't using it for real. Like,
Yeah.
he's good, and he's not arrogant. He's self-deprecating, and he's warm, and he's funny, and he's wry, and he's scintillatingly clever, and he's an absolute craftsman. He's incredibly dedicated to his art. So his sentences are like perfectly crafted gems of meaning, and he does incredibly nice things across the structure of his books with patterning and irony, and he's deadly funny. And you think, God, there aren't many blokes like that around.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a feminist in the kind of conventional doctrinaire sense, but also I'm just like, men are such pricks a lot of the time. And Mark is just such a nice guy. And he's so clever, you know, like he's unapologetically clever and nerdy. Like there's some hilarious passages of like the kind-hearted nerd in the world, and it hurts being Mark. Like these books are basically about how hurtful it is existing at this weird late stage of human development.
Yeah, and the fact that the entire genesis of the book seems to be the nature of knowing that his kid is going to grow up in this world, and that's why he goes, well, I better go out here and investigate as to what life is going to be like for my own child. It's a great genesis for a book.
Yeah, and he always has these kind of like Homeric, crushing returns home where it's just like, what do I tell this kid?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the daily reality now. And so Mark wrote this, you know, as I'm sure he told you, Mark wrote this 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now. When he first sent it to us, it was going to be called 2 minutes to midnight, or 4 minutes to midnight, you know, this reference to the doomsday clock.
Mm-hmm.
And he was uneasy about that title, partly because in the time after delivering the proposal to writing the actual book, it went to kind of 1 minute to midnight. You know, Trump squaring off against Korea was the kind of the current threat. You know, if you think this is how many crises have we seen since then in this kind of escalation of the idea of the end times, and now we're obviously living through this kind of dress rehearsal / you know, prologue of the end time / act one. I don't know what we call it. No, the clock is striking, right?
Yeah. And yet here are you and I having a perfectly relatively optimistic conversation about it, which seems slightly.
And I just got a really nice gin and tonic, and I'm going to go and watch a really hilarious sitcom in a minute with my beautiful wife, whatever. You know, the disconnect between the horror and the domestic is is bewildering and also unavoidably blackly comic, and that is why I think Mark is such a great writer. Because you cannot help but laugh as you watch the meteorite come down to blow you to smithereens.
I also get the feeling now immediately that you must have been exceptional at your job when you were in Granta, and that you must have been great at you know, just pitching your authors out into the world and telling everybody how great they were.
You mean I'm good at blowing hot air up these vulnerable, needy people's asses? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
it's a tough gig, but it's fine. Okay, okay, that's number one.
What I discovered is the authors are incredibly needy people. And not until I became, you know, I used to get an author ring me up and say, oh, I read that review in the Irish Times. And I go, oh, God, what did the Irish Times? Okay, all right, I saw that thing with Ricochet. And I'm like, what did Ricochet know? And then when it happened to me, I was like, I need to go and lock myself in a cabin for 9 months. Ricochet only gave me 4 out of 5 stars. I can't live in this world, you know.
I find that really, really hard to believe. That's fantastic. Look, I'm completely with you on that, 100%. And again, we've had him on the program before, and if people want to go back and see the episode with Mark talking about that, and they'll find it on the YouTube channel as well. Okay, that's book number one.
Am I doing okay with the modeling?
Yeah, side? You are. Yeah, that's 100% right. Yeah, I can.
I've got model hands.
Okay, give us some more hand modeling then. Yeah, what's book 2?
Book 2 is a book that I just read recently, and it because I kind of have 3 or 4 different reading lives. One of my reading lives is reading books that I'm sent or manuscripts by people that I know that I'm kind of obliged to read. One is my pure pleasure reading, so that's books by the bed, crime thrillers, comics, essays, biographies, etc. There's the toilet, there's poetry is in that stream. But one of my reading streams is my kind of the thing I never talk about on social media or anything, which is my kind of personal. I guess it would be my spiritual reading, and it largely concerns animism and a relationship between human beings and the natural world. And I was just delighted, utterly charmed recently to read this book. It's called To Speak for the Trees by Diana Beresford Kroger, who is an Irish woman of English aristocratic descent who has lived in Canada most of her adult life. And she is a botanist, a tree expert, a plant scientist, but she was raised You have to correct my pronunciation. Her parents, she was orphaned as a child, and she was raised by her family in the Lachines.
I'll have to take your word for that. That sounds entirely plausible to me.
Bantry Bay.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Above Bantry Bay sounds perfect.
Yeah, and I've been there, and I know it to be a sacred part of the world. So I was excited to read this book because it rings true to me in terms of what that area felt like to me. But it basically recounts how she was given the Celtic wisdom of her forebears, particularly the matriarchal forebears, handed down through the sisterhood of Celtic wisdom as a plant medicines, as well as reading Ogham script and things like that. The Celtic metaphysic, and it's about the loss of trees in Ireland. And as an English person, as an English pacifist, pro-European, etc., one is used to reading about English atrocities abroad. But as someone that worships trees, it broke my heart to read this beautiful description of the way that the English came and chopped down all the trees in Ireland, and the way that some of the trees that remain in Ireland only remain on the estates of the wealthy English aristocrats. And it's a beautiful book. Basically what it does is marry this ancient wisdom with modern science, because as she goes into the kind of academy of botany, she realizes that the things she was taught, the uses of plants, their sacred uses, etc., the meaning of each tree in the calendar of the year is of course all utterly verifiable and advanceable and in check and in advance of modern science. It's an incredible book for people that believe in the fact that plants in Gaia, basically, in the use of plants, and that plants have souls and all this magnificent stuff. And then at the end of the book, as a kind of bonus, after you get her lovely life story, she gives you a Celtic alphabet of trees. So she goes through all the tree species.
Oh, fantastic.
With their Ogham symbol letter, and tells you the history of the tree in Ireland and in the world, their usage, and then the modern science that proves, for example, that why hazel is good for dowsing, or the use of the oak tree in ancient societies and stuff. It's just absolutely right. It's just right. She's right.
And that is to speak for the trees. Yeah, that's perfect.
And from an environmental campaigning point of view, she's right. You know, what we would do to the carbon footprint of the world, to all our carbon targets if every human being planted 8 trees. She's right. So it's got this lovely, I guess she's a fairly elderly woman now. She's got this slightly rambunctious, she's not afraid of saying that she was very good at stuff when she was young. Not that she was the cleverest in her year. It's just charming and profound and wise. And I think for Irish readers as well, it has this lovely reckoning with the wisdom of the past and what was lost.
I've gone through a phase quite recently of reading Robert Macfarlane. I read Underland, his book last year, and I think that was one of the first times I'd come across something in so long that had made me feel a connection to nature in a way that made me go, I'm going out, I'm going walking, I'm going to the hills, I'm going to find somewhere where I can't hear a road anywhere, and obviously I would have very much liked to have gone much further. That there's whole sections in it where he goes to Iceland and where he goes to Greenland. That won't be happening for a while, but it's one of those books that made me feel, I think, something similar as well. And I think that I'd like to think that's something people are turning more towards now.
Robert's a master stylist. Well, in the same way as Mark's book represented other books by people I used to work with, this book represents books by Rob, by Kathleen Jamie, by Tim D. I'm reading Tim D's Greenery at the moment, which is a masterpiece about the relationship between humans and birds and migration and the movement of spring across the planet. This is my special reading. This is the stuff that really makes me tick.
I love gateway books as well. So you've given us not just 2 books, but 2 books that are gateways to a whole other series of ideas. And
we're on a map. I think of it as a map. We're all on our own individual bespoke reading maps, and off we go. And you never know. There's no wrong turns. Off we go.
Tell us about book number 3 then. Where's that going to lead us?
Book number 3 is this book called The Discomfort of the Evening, by a young Dutch writer. It's her debut. She's on the shortlist, I think, for the International Man Booker Prize. This book represents my love of reading books in translation, which was something I was committed to in my job and I'm committed to as a reader. why wouldn't you learn about the world? You know, why wouldn't you have open borders in your mind? I'd like open borders in the world, but we can't get everything we wish for. But I think the ability to travel into other cultures, into other consciousnesses, into other languages is an astonishing privilege. It really excites me. This is the story, but, you know, so yeah, this represents, you know, a book I'm reading by Annie Ernaux, great French writer, Dorte Nors, fantastic Danish short story writer, my favorite Norwegian novel I read this year, the Yoko Ogawa, which is just mind-blowingly good and interesting book. But this one, just to rattle through it, this is just the proof. I wish I had the finished cover to show you, because it's her in her red coat, her stinky red coat, which she never takes off. It's about a young girl growing up on a Dutch dairy farm with kind of extreme religious parents. And she, as her brother goes ice skating one afternoon, she says to herself, I hope he dies while he's out ice skating, and he does. And thus begins this book about grief, really, and mourning, but in a kind of hyper grotesque sort of I mean, it's staggeringly scatological, unnerving. I mean, it's European literature of the highest caliber, and it makes you squirm with the kind of level of representational detail, but also the peculiarity of her mind and the sort of sheer strangeness, these sort of slight fantasies she's having about what's going on in the world and what's being kept in the basement, and where her brother might be and how she could bring him back, and what's going on with her siblings' sex lives and organs. And it's properly like, you know, when you're like, oh, I guess I kind of understand what books are doing now. And then you read one and you're like, woo!
Yep.
You know, she blows the roof off. Extraordinary stuff, but disturbing and interesting and knotty and weird and.
You see, that sounds exactly like the sort of thing I'm going to read as well. I'm with you again entirely with books and translation. I think people should, you know, read more whenever they get the opportunity to. I've read a fair amount of Japanese and Korean stuff recently, even one that was French that was set in South Korea as well. I think, you know, anything that gives you the mindset of people who live in other countries through their own words, through translation. It's always, you know, it's always. And, you know, for somebody who likes traveling, there's not going to be a lot of that happening around either.
Exactly.
Well, and this is the only way to do it. And I'm perfectly good.
Well, I think it helps you look at yourself and your own communities and your own, you know, like I tried to write Lanny like an English novel as if written by someone that was just utterly baffled by the English and what an ordinary English community would be like, which I hope means that it traveled. If you get the specificity right, I hope it has some relevance elsewhere.
Yeah, 100%.
I should say, because it's always important to name the translator, that this is translated by Michelle Hutchinson, this incredible book by Marika Lucas Reinfeldt.
Crucial. Can I ask you just before, because I know you've got a couple of other things you want to show me. Are you always this joyful about things that you really love? Because it's absolutely infectious.
Oh, that's nice. No, I'm a terrible cynic, but I was a bookseller first of all. I love selling books. I love the hand sell. You know, I love to say to someone, I'm not shitting you. Trust me, this is really good. And they come back a week later and go, I loved it. What else?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love and also I think that's all I was doing as a publisher is you're trying to harness the hand sell. You're trying to sincerely go to your customer and say these are good books.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons I'm doing this nonsense from my bedroom.
Yeah. And you're not an algorithm, you're a human being.
Yeah,
incredible value. The minute you stop doing this, we all just obey the algorithms and buy what we're told by a computer, and that will not be good for us.
I'm okay if it's, you know, Max Porter told me to continue doing this. That'll keep me going for another couple of months. That'll be fine. Caroline Timlin says in comments, she says, I'm literally just about to begin Lanny. I'm delighted that Max is on tonight. Suzanne Kelly says Lanny is the most beautiful book to read and to look at on the page as well. There's a load of those all coming in. If you've got another question, you can drop it in just before we finish with Max. I like that you've just gone, there's one or two other things I'd like to show you, because what else have you got there? You've got a couple of other bits and pieces.
Well, this is a cheat, right? This isn't one of I just wanted to quickly say that one of the things I'm reading at the moment is a lot of graphic novels, and I'm trying to write a thing where I'm trying to basically write a thing where I write in prose or poetic prose, as the case may be, or shards of essay. Like you've read my books, you know what I'm up to. Mm-hmm. But I want to achieve I want to harness the power, the energy that graphic novels achieve between image and text. Mm-hmm. And then sudden emptiness. You know how in a graphic novel you could have, you know, 3 or 4 pages of incredible detail, and frame by frame by frame by frame, and then just, you know, an extraordinary moment of stillness.
Yep.
And I'm actually working with this guy, John McNaught. He's an incredible artist, I think, really so good on the small, poignant details of life. But I am finding that I'm not reading much. I'm reading some crime novels, but comics, graphic novels are just really working for me. You know, weird Japanese stuff, manga stuff, some of the best contemporary writing about race relations and politics and identity is being done in graphic novel form. Incredible graphic novel I just read about mental health, you know, where the images itself come to represent the feeling of mental unease and the breakdown.
Fantastic.
You know, again, in translation, incredibly weird French-Canadian graphic novel, which you realise the whole thing, these little fairy people, the whole thing is set in a corpse. Just crazy stuff out there. So that's my fourth choice. Okay, it's just graphic novels, the whole of them, all of the comics. But then I wanted to say, just because it's the kind of lifeblood of my reading, and I know a lot of your viewers and members of the book club feel the same. And I know in lockdown, a lot of us have had an almost a crutch, like there's been a sort of a therapeutic dimension to this for people, as there should always be, in my view, and that's just poetry. That's going to poetry for your daily succor, for the immediacy, for the exactitude, you know, for in 2 lines finding what a novel might take 200 pages to do. And as a result, you know, I'd recommend Roger Robinson's extraordinary book, the godfather of the British black poetry scene, finally being recognised in the UK. But he's been around for years doing great work in music and poetry. This is a heartbreaking book about all sorts, about black British identity, but also Grenfell, and also the legacy of slavery and all that's been got so wrong and so heartbreakingly wrong in our country.
I think maybe for those people who weren't watching 2 weeks ago, that was also recommended by Bernardine Evaristo a couple of weeks ago when she was on. She recommended
I mean, Roger's just fantastic, and he's not. It's incredibly readable poetry. It packs a punch, but it's not lecturing you. It's just it's truth. It's truth speaking. You know, he's had one foot in the spoken word his whole life, so he knows how to address an audience. New work by Daisy Lafarge, A.K. Blakemore, Mumtaza Mary, Fran Locke. This incredible poet, Anthony Anaxaguru, one of the best books of poetry that's come out of the UK in years, I think. Ren Dang by Will Harris. So this isn't to bore you all, but just to I couldn't choose one book of poetry, so I just wanted to say that what a good time it is. And as a slightly self-hating Englishman, I think with good reason, I just wanted to kind of make a claim for the loyalty and the community and the brilliance of the British poetry community, English poetry community at the moment. This is where the good, interesting, experimental, passionate, political, activist work is happening.
Yeah, you're not the first person to do so. There's been a lot of that happening, and again, I think it's fantastic to find that poetry is one of those things that's made people feel slightly better about themselves, or, you know, just make the world a slightly better place over the course of all of this. Can you ask Max which Annie Ernaux book he just held up? I've just been starting The Years by her, which was
The Years.
Yeah,
whichever wise person that is. The Years, I think, is one of the best books I have ever read in my whole life. I think it is a game-changingly incredible book, as I'm sure you're discovering if you're reading it. This is the one I'm reading at the minute. Which is about her mother's Alzheimer's. And as you can imagine, the form of the book is harnessed to the exploration of Alzheimer's as an illness. I mean, I would say about the poetry thing, Rick, like, you know, ignore our politicians and read our poets. Like the scale of the contribution is almost equal. You know, for every harm and lie and toxicity and barefaced, scandalous, corrupt load of rubbish we get from them in Westminster, we get this brilliant, analytical, compassionate, excavating, historicizing, careful, witty, funny, brilliant stuff from the poets. I'd have them. I'd swap them all over if you wanted. You know,
I think you get a better end result, but that's something I've thought for a long time.
But don't you also think that with historians? Don't you think, God, if all the historians were in charge, they all know, they know what happened.
They have some sense of cause and effect.
To grow Parliament.
Before we finish, it would be very remiss of me if I didn't ask you what you're doing now. Can you tell us anything about what's next? What's happening?
I have written unexpectedly. I'm doing loads of collaborations with musicians here and abroad. Doing a fantastic concept album about death with the band Tongue. I'm writing some songs with a singer in Kentucky called Joan Shelley and her partner Nathan. I just did a booklet with Bonnie Prince Billy, and there's all sorts of good bubbling lockdown collaborations going on. I accidentally wrote an essay come poem come fantasia about painting, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time, trying to write as painting, not of it, not about it, trying to create for the reader a painterly experience on the page. And I finished that, and hopefully that will come out next year, and just cracking on with it all, really.
I've just finally, before we finish, Grace Tierney says, if Max was my local bookseller, I would have to lock up my credit card. Just so you're aware, that's what you've got tonight out of this.
Well, there's something you haven't got a shortage of in Ireland, is good booksellers. Are the bookshops all open and doing all right now?
Their bookshops have reopened, yeah, and most of them are. I think there were a lot of people who were being very cautious, and it's something we talk about here and talk about in the book club a lot as well, about making sure to support local bricks and mortar bookstores wherever humanly possible as well. I mean, maybe just before we do finish, you were a bookseller as well. What do you think about the nature of the situation that bookshops, both here and in the UK, find themselves now? I mean, it's not an easy time.
It's almost the most heartbreaking thing you can imagine in various different ways, isn't it? Like the physicality and proximity when we need it most in the world is the thing that we now can't do. I was involved in a few charity projects locally that have had to shut down, but they were basically all about, let's get bodies in a room together to talk across the divides that now exist in our society. And I feel the same about bookshops. I feel the same about a lot of different things, and education. I think with bookshops, one has to almost be a bit more pro-choice, like almost politicize every pound you spend, and just think like, I could click and get that on. I mean, obviously the arguments against Amazon are like infinite. It's a death machine. but like the ease of the click versus the difficulty of walking into town, standing in a queue for 10 minutes, not quite being able to browse, etc. That's an investment of time which is going to literally save for as long as possible the things we most value, which is range and choice and independence and craft and class and touch and love. To me it is about love, and it is about an economy where we continue, even when it's actively difficult to do so, a prioritizing of these shared values of ours. I think we can't imagine how crap our commercial social environments are going to be if we lose these things. So yeah, I think it's worth the effort. And as regards all the kind of spraying down of books and stuff, like being a bookseller, it should be hard work. It's good if it's hard work. You know, I used to be knackered as a bookseller. It's good. It's fun. You know, if you have to spend another half an hour, basically, if you said to me you have to pay £2 more for every paperback you buy, because the time taken for a bookseller to maybe spray it down, put it back on the shelf, put it in quarantine, whatever, fine. I'll spend £2 less on wine, or I'll do without my Netflix next month, whatever. Like, I think books are phenomenally good value, like compared to what a cup of coffee costs, or a pair of shoes, or a non-existent. I joyfully 100% give that money on to spend on a book. We don't even have tax on books in the UK, so we like £7.99. It's an extraordinary bargain.
I think this has been a far greater joy than I could possibly have imagined it being. Thank you so much both for coming in.
We can do this any day of the week.
Well, then that's fine, and I love the idea that potentially we will do this face to face somewhere in the real world, in front of a real live audience someday. Max Porter, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us tonight on Shelf Analysis. Cheers, man.
Very well, everyone. Cheers. Oh, look, good luck with the dogs.
Thanks a million. Cheers, Max. Good luck. They just keep raising the bar, authors, don't they? That's why I keep doing it. Thank you very much for watching the program tonight. There will be another one next Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, as per usual, here in the Ricochet Book Club. Don't forget, you'll be able to catch all of the previous episodes on the YouTube channel. Just look up Ricochet Shelf Analysis in YouTube and you'll find it there. And on RTE Culture, if that's where you're watching us, we're here as well. Back same time next week. So listen, until then, thanks a million for joining us. That was one of the best ones. See you next week.